Ben Porter came home expecting a cold stove and an empty table. Instead, lamplight burned behind his kitchen window, and Naomi Walker was inside, calmly setting down 2 plates beside a freight bill bearing both their father's names. Ben filled the doorway, trail dust still on his coat, one hand near his holster. Naomi never backed away. "Your foreman hired me to find where your money was going," she said, sliding the old invoice across the table. Outside, his tired horse stamped against the October cold. Inside, supper steamed between them, and 4 handwritten words suggested someone had been charging Ben for a road his family might already own with hers. If you were Ben, would you sit down or start asking questions? Benjamin Porter saw the light before he saw the house. He had been riding west for the better part of an hour, following the narrow wagon track that cut through the yellow grass toward North Star Ranch. Behind him, the Medicine Bow country was already losing its color. The last sunlight lay along the ridges in a thin copper line, and the first cold of an October evening had begun to settle into the low ground. Ben had been gone 19 days, long enough for the smell of cattle to work itself into his coat, long enough for dust to find every seam in his boots, long enough that the thought of his own kitchen, his own wash basin, and a night without somebody else's snoring had begun to seem like luxury. He expected North Star to be dark. Instead, a lamp burned behind the kitchen window. Ben's horse felt him change before he made a sound. The bay gelding shortened his stride, easy. Ben drew rein. A narrow thread of smoke rose from the chimney. He sat still in the saddle. Most of the hands slept in the bunkhouse 60 yards east of the main house. His foreman, Tom, had permission to enter when Ben was away, but Tom never bothered with lamps in the main house. He had his own room beside the tack shed. Ben looked toward the bunkhouse. Dark. The barn doors were shut. A lantern hung outside the stable, but nobody moved beneath it. Then the wind shifted. Ben smelled onions. A second later came beef, pepper, and something baked. He frowned. Someone was cooking supper in his house. At 39, Ben Porter had learned that strange things rarely improved because a man stared at them from horseback. He swung down. The motion looked easier than it was. After 19 days on the trail, his knees objected when his boots struck the ground. He stood 6'7" in his stockings, and the years had put weight across his shoulders without softening him anywhere else. In Juniper Crossing, men who had never spoken to him sometimes stepped aside when he entered a doorway. Ben had stopped noticing. His horse still noticed when he was tired. The bay nudged his shoulder. "You're fed before I am." Ben tied the reins to the porch rail. He climbed the steps. The holster at his hip remained closed, but his right hand rested near it as he looked through the window. A woman stood at his stove. Ben recognized her after a moment. Naomi Walker. She had come to Juniper Crossing sometime in the summer. He had seen her at Samuel Kent's livery and once at Walter Pierce's county office. Another time she had been standing outside Margaret Lane's boarding house with a stack of papers under one arm and a brown mare's lead rope in the other. He remembered the mare more clearly than he remembered most people. Naomi had been checking the animal's teeth while 2 men tried to tell her what she ought to be looking for. She had ignored both of them. Now she was in Ben's kitchen. Her dark brown dress had plain cuffs rolled above the wrists. A narrow white apron covered the front of it. Her hair was pinned back neatly, though one small curl had worked loose near her temple. There were papers spread across one end of his table. At the other end sat 2 plates. Ben opened the door. Naomi turned. She did not scream. She did not reach for anything. Her eyes went first to his face, then briefly to the hand resting near his holster. "Mr. Porter." Ben closed the door behind him. "Miss Walker." The stew bubbled quietly between them. Naomi lowered the wooden spoon. "You made good time." Ben looked at her, then at the table, then back at her. Apparently, something almost changed around her mouth, not quite a smile. Ben took off his hat. "What are you doing in my house? Working?" She pointed toward the papers. And cooking supper. I noticed that part. This time the smile came, small, gone quickly. Ben waited. Naomi set the spoon beside the stove. Tom Ellis hired me 3 days ago. Sloan Freight sent another account statement. Tom said the totals looked wrong, but he couldn't find where. Ben's expression tightened. Where is Tom? Juniper Crossing. Eli Mercer got his hand caught between a gate and a post this afternoon. Nothing broken as far as Tom could tell, but it swelled badly. He took him to Dr. Webb. Ben glanced toward the dark bunkhouse again. That explained the quiet. Tom let you in? He did. And the supper? Naomi looked at the pot. That was my decision. Ben's eyebrows lifted. I'd been here since noon. Your trail hand rode through yesterday and told Tom you were expected tonight. There was beef in the cold box, potatoes in the cellar, and enough flour left to make biscuits. She paused. If you object, I'll pay for what I used. Ben stared at her for half a second longer than necessary. You audited 3 days of freight bills and you're offering to pay me for a potato? 2 potatoes. That caught him. A low sound left his chest before he could stop it. Naomi looked at him. Ben realized he had laughed. Barely, still, it had happened. He unbuckled his gun belt and hung it from the peg beside the door. The movement seemed to settle something in the room. I need to wash. The water in the kettle is hot. Ben looked toward the stove. She had heated that too. He said nothing. At the washstand, he poured water into the basin and scrubbed his hands. Dust came away and brown ribbons. He washed his face next, bent awkwardly beneath the little mirror he had hung too low years ago, and never bothered moving. When he turned, Naomi was putting stew into the bowls. She did not tell him where to sit. That was another thing he noticed. Ben took the chair nearest the wall. It creaked beneath him. Naomi sat across from him. For several moments, there was only the sound of spoons against crockery. Ben had eaten worse food beside better fires. He had eaten better food without remembering any of it. This he noticed. The beef was tender. The onions had been browned first. There was enough black pepper to taste, but not enough to bury everything else. He broke a biscuit in half. You cook like this every time you audit a ledger? No. Good. Why? I'd have to start making mistakes on purpose. Naomi looked down at her bowl, that smile again, and took another bite. The room felt different with another person in it. Smaller, perhaps, or simply occupied in places that had usually held nothing but furniture. He had built the house 9 years earlier. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, a narrow sitting room he hardly used. Everything had been put where a man could reach it without asking another person to move. He had never considered that a table for 4 could look empty with 1 man at it. Tonight, 2 places were set, and somehow that looked more natural than he wanted to admit. Naomi finished half her stew before she touched the papers. Then she pulled 3 freight bills from the stack. Are why I'm still here. Ben wiped his fingers and took the first one. Numbers had never frightened him. He simply disliked the amount of time they required. Naomi pointed to a line. May 17th, 12 heads shipped east. North Star paid the cattle handling charge here. Her finger moved down, and again here. Ben looked closer. Different wording, same amount. He picked up the second bill, could be clerical. Once, yes, she gave him the third. July 9th, another duplicated fee, then another. Ben's jaw shifted. Sloan, his office at least. Edgar knows what leaves his office. Naomi did not agree. She did not disagree. I don't accuse people from arithmetic alone. Ben looked up. What do you accuse them from? Patterns. There was no pride in the answer, just certainty. She pulled one older invoice from beneath the others. This pattern interests me more. The paper was yellow at the folds. One corner had been repaired with a narrow strip of paste. Ben recognized his father's handwriting near the top. His hand stopped. Naomi noticed. This one predates Sloane's current account books. How far? 14 years. Ben read the date. His father had still been alive then. Naomi turned the paper so the lamplight fell across the bottom margin. A handwritten notation sat beneath the freight total. Porter Walker Spring Road. Ben read it twice. Walker. Naomi's gaze remained on the page. My father's name was Isaac Walker. Ben leaned back. My father was James Porter. I know. You knew him? No. The answer came quickly. My father mentioned North Star once. That's all I remember. I was young. Ben looked again at the words. Porter Walker. There were no terms, no acreage, no amount. Only those 4 words beneath a freight charge that North Star had apparently been paying in one form or another for years. What does Spring Road mean? Naomi shook her head. I was hoping you knew. I don't. Then somebody did. Outside, the wind pushed against the wall. The lamp flame moved. Ben suddenly remembered something his father used to say whenever a neighbor wanted to cross North Star during dry months. Leave the south gate unchained. He had never asked why. His father had died before Ben took full control of the ranch. There had been debts to settle, cattle to replace, fences to mend. Old arrangements had become habits, and habits had survived after the reasons for them disappeared. Naomi gathered the newer invoices into a straight stack. Sloane Freight has charged North Star something called a granite road fee for at least 7 years. Everyone pays road fees, not like these. She tapped the old invoice. This suggests your family may already have had an access arrangement. With yours. Possibly. Ben watched her. What do you want from it? Naomi did not look offended. That interested him. An answer, that's all, for tonight. She folded her napkin and placed it beside the bowl. Ben almost smiled again. For tonight, Naomi stood. I should go before the temperature drops further. Ben looked toward the window. Dark had settled completely. I'll ride you in. No need, it's 9 miles. I rode 9 miles out. That was daylight. Naomi put on her coat. So was most of my life until 5 o'clock. Ben looked at her. She looked back. Neither moved. Then Ben nodded. All right. No argument, no instruction. Naomi seemed to notice that. They stepped outside. Cold air swept across the porch. Her mare stood near the hitching rail beside a small canvas saddlebag. Ben moved toward the horse, then stopped. Something along the saddle had caught his eye. The near-side cinch strap was cracked almost halfway through. He bent slightly to see it better. Naomi followed his gaze. It held coming out. It may not going back. She crouched beside him. The leather had dried at the buckle hole. Another hard pull could tear it. I have spare latigo in the barn, Ben said. I can change it. I know. He started to reach for the buckle, stopped. His hand remained suspended for a moment beside the saddle. Then he looked at her. May I? Naomi's eyes moved from his hand to his face. Something in her expression changed. Not softness exactly, attention, yes. Ben unfastened the damaged strap. His fingers made the buckle look smaller than it was, but the work itself was careful. He went to this barn, returned with a length of good leather, trimmed it at the tack bench and punched the holes by lantern light. Naomi held the lantern, neither spoke much. When he finished, Ben checked the tension once and stepped back. There, Naomi ran her thumb over the new leather. What do I owe you? Nothing. I don't like owing people, then find out what Porter Walker Spring Road means. She looked toward the house. Through the kitchen window, the 2 empty plates were still visible on the table. Then she turned back to him. Those old ledgers of yours. Ben followed her gaze. What about them? If you want to know why your father's name and mine are sitting on the same freight paper, we'll need more than what Sloane chose to bill you. She put one boot in the stirrup. The answer may already be in North Star's books. Ben steadied the mare without being asked. but he kept his hand on the bridle rather than on Naomi. She mounted. And if it isn't? He asked. Naomi gathered the reins. Then we find out who benefited from making sure it disappeared. She turned the mare toward Juniper Crossing. Ben stood at the rail as hoofbeats faded into the darkness. Only after they were gone did he return inside. The kitchen had gone quiet. He lifted the old invoice again. Porter Walker Spring Road. Beside it sat 2 used plates. Ben looked at the second one for a long moment before carrying them both to the wash basin. By the following Sunday, Naomi Walker was back at North Star. She arrived shortly after 9 with a leather document case strapped behind her saddle, and enough determination in her face to make Ben suspect she had already found something he would not like. He had been awake since before daylight. The south pasture needed checking. 2 sections of fence near the creek had sagged after the last rain. There were plenty of reasons he could have been somewhere else when Naomi rode into the yard. Instead, he was repairing a chair in the kitchen. It was the one she had used the week before. One leg had always rocked slightly. Ben had ignored it for 3 years. Now it bothered him. Naomi noticed the fresh peg when she sat down. She ran one finger along the repair. "Chair give you trouble?" "No." She looked at him. Ben poured coffee. "Could have." Naomi accepted the cup. She took one sip and glanced toward the stove. "This isn't the coffee you had last week." "No, it's better." "Tom bought it." "Of course he did." Ben turned toward the ledger before she could see the corner of his mouth move. That became the shape of their Sundays. Not every Sunday was supper at first. Some were spent at the North Star kitchen table with freight receipts spread between coffee cups. Others took them south to Walker Meadow, where Naomi walked the property with a notebook while Ben checked fence lines and old wagon cuts. Walker Meadow sat where the lower grassland began to rise toward the Medicine Bow country. 40-some acres of open ground sloped toward a spring that ran cold, even in dry weather. There was an old barn near the eastern boundary, weathered gray and leaning slightly north, but its stone footing remained sound. Naomi saw possibility where most men saw repairs. 6 stalls here, she said one afternoon, standing inside the barn. Ben looked at the rotting partitions. "You've got 2, I said 6. You've got lumber for 2, I'll buy lumber for 4. "With what?" Naomi closed her notebook. "The money I'll earn after you stop letting Sloan Freight steal from you." Ben considered that. Fair enough. She wanted a horse yard, not a cattle ranch. Teams coming through Juniper Crossing needed fresh animals. Small ranchers sometimes needed a saddle horse for a week without having enough cash to buy one. Freight wagons needed harness inspected, horses rested, and somewhere to water before climbing toward the higher road. Naomi understood those needs because she had spent years entering them into other men's books. Now she wanted the books to carry her own name. Ben never told her whether he thought the plan would work. He simply began measuring the barn. That mattered more. Their arrangement settled into something neither of them had proposed. Naomi found errors in North Star's accounts. Ben repaired a gate at Walker Meadow. Naomi traced old freight charges. Ben showed her where spring runoff cut across the lower wagon approach. When they worked late, one of them eventually looked toward the kitchen. Then supper happened. No invitation, no name for it. On the 3rd Sunday, Ben took 2 plates from the cupboard before Naomi had finished closing the ledger. She noticed. She said nothing. So did he. Juniper Crossing noticed other things. Small towns always did. It happened on a Wednesday at Palmer's General Store. Ben had come for lamp oil, nails, and a new coil of rope. Naomi was at the counter comparing 2 invoices Samuel Kent had brought from the livery. A cattle hand named Roy Danner stood near the stove, with enough whiskey in him to make his voice travel farther than his judgment. "Porter," Roy called. "Heard you've got yourself a bookkeeper living half her Sundays out at North Star." The store grew quieter. Ben set the coil of rope on the counter. Roy smiled because nobody had stopped him yet. Must be nice having somebody handle the figures and the supper. Ben turned. Roy's smile weakened. Ben did not move toward him. That seemed to make the room more uncomfortable than if he had. At 6'7", Ben did not need to step close to make another man reconsider distance. His shoulders nearly filled the space between two shelves. One hand rested beside the rope. "Open empty. Miss Walker can answer for herself," he said. I blinked. Naomi folded Samuel's invoice. Then she turned. "Mr. Danner, Mr. Porter pays me to find money his freight company misplaced." A couple of men near the stove looked down. Naomi continued. "Last week I found $43. Roy shifted. She gave him a pleasant look. "If you'd like, I can inspect your accounts too." Samuel Kent coughed into his fist. It sounded suspiciously like laughter. Roy muttered something and turned toward the stove. Ben picked up his rope. Outside, Naomi came down the boardwalk behind him. "You could have frightened him half to death. He was already doing a fair job of making himself foolish. You were angry." Ben stopped beside the hitching rail. Naomi waited. "Yes, you didn't look angry." Ben tightened the knot on his supply sack. "That's usually when I'm most careful." For a moment, Naomi said nothing. The street moved around them. A wagon rolled past carrying sacks of grain. Somewhere near Samuel's smithy, iron struck iron in 3 clean blows. Naomi looked at Ben's hands, then at his face. "That's not what people say about you." No, he did not offer more. She did not ask. Not yet. That Sunday, Naomi found the Granite Road charges, 7 years of them. She spread the receipts across Ben's kitchen table in chronological order. Some were faded almost white along the folds. Others still carried Sloan Freight and Cattle's dark blue stamp. Ben stood behind her. "Same charge," Naomi said. "Different amounts, adjusted by load weight. That's normal. The charge may be. The authority isn't." She pulled a contract from the stack. "I can find freight terms, handling terms, winter storage, nothing granting Edgar Sloan ownership of a road across North Star." Ben leaned closer. Naomi could feel his presence behind her without being crowded by it. He stopped before his coat touched the back of her chair. She had begun to notice that about him. Ben Porter always knew where his body was in relation to somebody else's. "Maybe the contract burned," he said. "Maybe." Walter Pierce had told them a fire damaged part of the county record storage years earlier. Enough documents survived to preserve ownership, but old easements and copies of private agreements had gaps. Naomi tapped the old invoice. Or maybe Sloan has been collecting money because nobody remembered they didn't owe it. Ben's jaw tightened. "How many ranches? I know of North Star and Samuel's livery accounts. I want to see more before I say, you think there are more. I think Edgar Sloan owns enough wagons that people stopped asking which charges were his and which belonged to the road." Ben pulled out the chair across from her, then asked. Naomi met his eyes. It was a simple sentence, but he had not said "we." He had not told her what to do. He had simply made room for her to keep going. 2 days later, Edgar Sloan rode onto Walker Meadow. Naomi was alone near the old barn, marking measurements for a new paddock. Sloan dismounted without waiting to be invited. He was 55, trim in a dark coat that had seen less dust than most coats in Wyoming territory. His gray hat was expensive. His boots were clean. "Miss Walker, Mr. Sloan." His gaze traveled across the meadow. "Pretty ground. It will be useful ground. I hear you intend to run horses." "I intend several things." Sloan smiled. "I admire plans." He removed an envelope from inside his coat. "I admire practical ones more." Naomi did not take it. "What's that?" "An offer. For what?" "The meadow." Now she took it. The number inside made her read it twice. It was enough money to return to Kansas, rent a yard, buy horses, and still keep cash in reserve. Sloan watched her face. "You wouldn't have to borrow." "No, no winter, wondering whether wagon traffic is enough. No rebuilding that barn. No fighting over access." Naomi looked up. "Cassess." Sloan adjusted one glove. Old wagon rights in this valley are complicated. Not so complicated you haven't been charging for them. His smile thinned. You've been looking at Porter's books. I've been doing the work I was hired to do. Then you know land isn't worth much commercially if a wagon can't legally reach the road. Naomi folded the offer. Are you telling me my meadow has no access? I'm telling you old records have a way of disappointing people. He put his foot in the stirrup. Think about the offer. Naomi held out the envelope. I already have. Sloane looked at it. He did not take it immediately. You should learn not to answer too quickly. Naomi's arm did not lower. And you should learn that a large number isn't the same thing as a difficult decision. Sloane finally took the envelope. He mounted. Before turning away, he looked toward the northern ridge where North Star lay beyond the grass. Porter can't stand between you and a deed. Naomi slipped her pencil into her pocket. He doesn't. Sloane waited. I do. He rode away without another word. The next morning, Naomi was at Walter Pierce's office when he unlocked the door. The county record room smelled of paper, dust, lamp smoke, and old leather bindings. Walter wore spectacles low on his nose and disliked being hurried before coffee. Naomi waited anyway. He brought out the Walker deed, then the adjoining Porter record. They worked beneath the front window while wagons passed outside. Naomi found the line shortly before noon. She read it once, then again. Walter stopped turning pages. What? She put her finger beneath the description. The deed gave Walker ownership to the spring. It described the meadow boundaries, but the wagon approach leading north toward the main road was referenced only by an older phrase, existing access according to Porter Walker Spring Road Agreement. No dimensions, no attached map, no surviving county copy. Naomi sat back. Walter removed his spectacles. The fire took a cabinet of secondary filings. When? 79. Could this agreement have been in it? It could. Could Sloane claim the wagon road? Walter took too long to answer. Naomi knew before he spoke. He can petition. Can he win? If he has an older easement and you don't have the agreement referenced here. Walter let the sentence end on its own. Outside, a freight wagon passed the window. Sloane Freight and Cattle was painted along its side. Naomi watched it roll toward the western road. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, Walker Meadow looked different in her mind. The spring was still hers, the barn was still hers, the grass, the fence, the soil beneath her boots, all hers. But a horse yard without dependable wagon access was a business trapped behind its own gate. Walter closed the deed carefully. Samuel Kent may remember the old rote. Naomi looked at him. Why Samuel? He was here before the fire. Worked teams through the Medicine Bow roads when he was young. And Ben's father. Walter hesitated. James Porter used the same route. Naomi rose. By sunset, she was standing outside Samuel Kent's smithy with Ben beside her. Samuel listened without interrupting, then set his hammer down. I remember a road, he said. Where? Naomi asked. Samuel looked toward the dark outline of the mountains. Old branch above Granite Creek. Hasn't carried a proper wagon in years. Was it Porterland? Ben asked. Some. Walker? Some. Samuel wiped his hands on his apron. There used to be a line cabin up there. Your fathers both stopped at it. Ben and Naomi looked at each other. Samuel noticed. Don't ask me what they agreed to. I wasn't sitting at their table. But you saw them there? Naomi asked. More than once. The smithy fire snapped behind him. Samuel pointed toward the mountains. If you're looking for survey marks, start above Granite Creek before the snow comes. Naomi followed his hand. The high country was already white along the farthest ridge. Ben looked at her. You still want the answer? She met his eyes. More than I did last week. Ben reached for his hat. Then we ride at first light. They left Juniper Crossing before sunrise. The town was still mostly dark when Naomi brought her mare out from Samuel Kent's livery. Frost silvered the hutching rails. Somewhere behind Margaret Lane's boarding house, a pump handle squealed twice, then stopped. The air smelled of cold iron, damp earth, and wood smoke. Ben was already waiting. He sat on the bay gelding from North Star with a bedroll tied behind the saddle and a canvas sack hanging from one side. A rifle rode in its scabbard, more for coyotes and distance than expectation. Naomi had packed bread, dried apples, coffee, and the notebook she refused to leave behind. Samuel came out of the smithy carrying a lantern. "Granite Creek splits about 8 miles up," he said. "Take the north branch. You'll see an old cottonwood that's been struck by lightning. Road climbs east from there. How far to the cabin?" Naomi asked. "Depends what you call a road." Ben looked at Samuel. Helpful. Samuel grinned. "You're welcome." They rode out as the first gray light touched the Medicine Bow foothills. For the first several miles, the trail was easy enough. Frozen wagon ruts ran between low sage and dry grass. Cattle tracks crossed the road in places where ranchers had moved stock before winter. Naomi rode well. Ben had known that already. But knowing something from a distance was different from spending hours beside it. She did not fight her mare's head. She kept her hands low, gave the animal room on uneven ground, and shifted her weight before the steep places instead of after them. "You've done this before," Ben said. Naomi glanced at him. "Ridden a horse?" "Ridden bad roads without complaining. I worked freight books in Kansas. Books don't climb mountains." "No. But freight wagons do." That answer stayed with him. By mid-morning, the road narrowed. They crossed Granite Creek, where the water ran shallow over black stone. Ice had formed along the edges in thin white shelves. Above them, pine crowded the slope. The first trouble came near an old loading pen. A ranch hand from one of the smaller outfits had been bringing 2 horses down from a side trail. One of them caught sight of a canvas sheet flapping loose from a broken wagon frame. The animal shied hard, the rider lost a stirrup, then the horse went up. Ben moved before Naomi could speak. He swung down and caught the reins near the bit as the animal came back to earth. For a few seconds, everything tightened. The horse blew hard, eyes white. The ranch hand cursed and tried to grab for the saddle horn. Ben planted his boots in the dirt. He had the strength to force the animal's head down. Naomi could see it, could see the pull through his shoulders. Instead, Ben held only enough pressure to keep the horse from backing into the rocks. "Easy," he said. The horse jerked once. Ben loosened. Another step. He loosened again. The canvas snapped in the wind. Ben turned the animal's head just enough to let it see the thing that had frightened it. The horse stood breathing. Ben waited. Only when its neck softened did he hand the reins back. "You all right?" he asked the ranch hand. The man nodded, embarrassed. "Yeah." Ben stepped away. No lecture, no show. They rode on. Naomi waited almost half a mile before speaking. "That story about you." Ben kept his eyes on the trail. "What story? You know which one?" The bay's ears moved. Ben said nothing. Naomi watched the side of his face. "People say a man on a cattle drive nearly died after you beat him." "People say many things. Did you?" Ben pulled his coat tighter at the throat. The trail angled upward. For a while, only hoofbeats answered. Then he said, 6 years ago, south of Casper." Naomi waited. "There was a trail boss named Lyle Mercer. Bad temper. Worse when he drank." Ben looked toward the trees. He had a ranch boy working under him, 17, maybe 18. Boy lost 3 head in rough country. Naomi already understood there was more. Mercer hit him. Ben's jaw moved once, kept hitting him after the boy was down. "What did you do?" "I stopped him." "How?" Ben glanced at her. "Poorly. They rode several yards. I hit him once, broke his jaw." Naomi did not look away, and then he pulled a knife. The words came flat. "The story says you nearly killed him." "I could have." Naomi's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "But you didn't, no." "Why?" Ben looked at the road ahead, because he was already beaten. That was all. Naomi let the silence sit. The trail entered a stretch of open ground where wind moved freely across the slope. Finally, she said, "People left that part out. That part wasn't interesting. It is to me." Ben looked at her. Naomi did not explain. Later, they stopped near a fallen pine and ate bread with dried beef. The sun had climbed, but never warmed the air much. Naomi sat on a flat stone, notebook balanced on one knee. Ben stood nearby drinking coffee from a tin cup. "My father lost most of what he had over freight records," she said. Ben lowered the cup. She had not meant to tell him that morning. Now the words came because his had. He worked for a horse and freight company outside Topeka. He found charges that didn't match the loads. Ben listened. He refused to sign off on them. What happened? The company said he was confused. Her mouth tightened. Then they said he was dishonest. Ben did not interrupt. He lost his position. "We sold 2 horses, then the wagon, then most of the tools." Naomi closed the notebook. "He spent years trying to prove numbers mattered." Ben looked down at the coffee. They do when someone is willing to read them." A cold gust passed between them. Naomi looked toward the mountains. "After that, I stopped trusting promises I couldn't verify." Ben nodded once. "No written record, no future, something like that." "Then why trust Samuel's memory?" "I don't." That surprised him. Naomi looked at him. "I use it to find what can be proved." Ben gave the smallest nod. He understood that. They found the old line cabin shortly after 3. It stood above Granite Creek under a ridge of lodgepole pine. The roof sagged on one side, but the walls still held. A narrow wagon trace disappeared under brush behind it. Naomi dismounted and began searching the ground. Ben checked the cabin first. Empty, no fresh tracks. Inside stood an iron stove, 1 rough table, and 2 wooden bunks without mattresses. "Luxury," Naomi said from the doorway. Ben looked at the roof. "Depends if it rains." They spent the next hour following the old road. Near the upper edge of a clearing, Naomi found the stake. Only 4 inches remained above ground. She brushed dirt from the weathered wood. 2 letters had been cut into one face. P.W. Ben crouched beside her. "Porter Walker, maybe. You don't sound convinced. I don't like evidence that tells me what I already want." Ben looked at her. "You're difficult, so I've been told." He almost smiled. Then thunder rolled over the ridge. Both looked west. The sky had darkened without either noticing. Rain came fast in the high country. They barely got the horses under the lean-to before it broke. Cold sheets swept across the clearing. Water ran off the cabin roof and cut small channels through the dirt. Ben stood inside the doorway, watching the trail vanish. "We're not going down in that." Naomi looked at the window. No argument. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped hard. They ate beside the stove. Naomi hung her damp coat on a peg. Ben spread the 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the room. The rain softened after dark, but did not stop. For a long while they listened to it. Ben fed another piece of wood into the stove. Naomi sat with her back against the wall. "You built North Star House yourself?" "Most of it." "Why only 1 bedroom?" Ben looked at her. "Only needed one." "At 30? At 30. At 39, Naomi drew her knees slightly closer. "You planned well, for 1 person." He said it without humor. The stove ticked as the iron warmed. Ben stared into the fire. "My father believed a man should need as little as possible." Naomi said nothing. "He thought dependence made a man weak, and you believed him, for a long time." "Do you still?" Ben took longer answering. "I built a whole house like I did." Naomi looked around the cabin. "A house doesn't need another person." Ben turned. She met his eyes. "A life might." The room went very quiet. Outside, rain moved through the pines. Ben reached across the small space between them. His hand stopped before touching hers. Naomi looked at it, then at him. Ben waited. She turned her palm upward. His fingers touched hers, carefully. Naomi did not move away. Neither spoke. The distance between them narrowed 1 inch at a time. Ben leaned forward, then stopped again. Naomi was the one who closed the last space. The kiss was brief, warm. Nothing hurried. When they pulled apart, Ben kept his forehead near hers for a second, then sat back. Naomi lowered her eyes. Not from regret, from the weight of something newly real. Neither said what it meant. They slept in separate bedrolls. By morning, the rain had cleared. The ride down was slow but uneventful. Juniper Crossing came into view near noon. Walter Pierce was waiting outside his office. That alone was wrong. He held a folded document in one hand. Ben dismounted. What happened? Walt looked at Naomi, then back at Ben. Edgar Sloan filed his petition this morning. Naomi's face tightened. Walter handed Ben the paper. It's an easement copy. Ben opened it. The date was old. The language granted wagon passage through the Porter side of the Spring Road. No Walker Wright appeared anywhere. At the bottom sat a signature, James Porter. Ben stared at it. Naomi stepped closer. Is that your father's hand? Ben did not answer immediately. His thumb moved once across the edge of the paper. It looks like it. Walter lowered his voice. If this copy stands, Sloan can argue the wagon route belonged to his predecessor through Porterland. Walker Meadows' reference becomes much harder to enforce. Naomi took the paper. She read the signature, then the date, then the missing language. Ben stood beside her, silent. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had trusted him enough to kiss him in a mountain cabin. Now she was holding a document that suggested his family had once benefited from cutting hers out. Ben finally stepped back. He did not defend his father. He did not tell her what to believe. He only said, "You should keep that copy." Then he turned and walked toward his horse. Naomi watched him go. The paper trembled once in the cold wind. She folded it carefully before the edge could tear. Walter Pierce stood beside her with his hat in both hands. I can make you another copy. This one is enough. You shouldn't decide what it means before we know where Sloan got it. Naomi looked toward the street. Ben had already mounted. His horse turned north without hurry, I know, but knowing did not make the paper lighter. For 3 days, Ben did not come to town. Naomi noticed because she had grown used to seeing him even when they had not made plans. At Samuel Kent's smithy, at Palmer's store, once near the post office, standing with a sack of oats over one shoulder while she pretended not to smile at how easily he carried it. Now North Star felt farther away than 9 miles. She told herself distance was useful. There was work to do. Walker Meadow still needed fencing. The barn roof still leaked along the north wall. Sloan's petition still sat in Walter Pierce's office waiting for a hearing date. And the Cheyenne letter arrived on Thursday. Margaret Lane brought it to Naomi at breakfast. Good paper, Margaret said, turning the envelope over before handing it across the table. Somebody spent money to ask something of you. Naomi recognized the return address. Carver Horse and Freight Company. She had worked for them 2 years before coming west. The letter was brief. They wanted her back, not as a clerk this time. Chief bookkeeper, steady salary, a room above the company office for the first 6 months, fuel allowance through winter, responsibility for 3 clerks and the shipping accounts. Naomi read it twice. Margaret poured more coffee. Good? Very. That's unfortunate. Naomi looked up. Margaret shrugged. Hard choices are rarely between good and bad. Naomi folded the letter. Cheyenne meant certainty. A warm office, regular pay, no argument over an old wagon road, no need to rebuild a barn before snow, no waiting to learn whether a dead man's signature might decide the future of her land. It also meant leaving Walker Meadow behind, and Ben. She disliked that his name came to mind before she finished the thought. That afternoon, she rode to North Star. Ben was repairing a hinge on the cattle shed. He saw her from a distance and set the hammer down. For a moment, neither moved, then Naomi dismounted. "I got a letter." Ben nodded. She had expected him to ask from whom. He did not. "Cheyenne," she said. His face changed very little. "Work?" "Chief of bookkeeper. Good position. Yes. Pay? Good. Housing. Included for 6 months." He nodded again. Naomi stared at him. The wind moved dust across the yard between them. "That's all you have to say?" Ben looked toward the open pasture. "What do you want me to say?" She hated the calmness of the question. "I don't know. Then I shouldn't invent something." Naomi stepped closer. "I asked because I thought you might have an opinion." "I do." "Then say it." Ben rubbed his thumb across the side of his hand, where the hammer handle had worn a dark line. "You earned the right to choose a life that doesn't make you fight every morning." Naomi's jaw tightened. "That isn't what I asked." "No." "What did I ask?" Ben met her eyes. "What I want." The answer settled between them. "Yes." He looked away first. "I don't think what I want should decide it." Naomi took one slow breath. "There's a difference between deciding for me and telling me the truth." Ben said nothing. That hurt more. She nodded once. "All right." "Naomi." She stopped. Ben had almost never used her first name. He looked as though there were more words somewhere behind his teeth. None came. Naomi mounted. "Sunday," she said. Ben's eyes lifted. "Maybe." Then she rode away. Sunday came cold and bright. Ben spent this morning at the south fence. He repaired 2 posts that could have waited until spring. At noon, he checked a steer with a swollen hock. At 2, he split wood. At 4, he went into the kitchen. The light had changed. That was what he noticed first. Sunday light usually reached the table at an angle and caught the edge of Naomi's ledger case. There was no case, no gloves beside the stove, no mare at the hitching rail. Ben opened the cupboard. He took out 2 plates, set them on the table, then stood there. The house made small sounds around him. Stove iron ticking, wind under the eaves, a loose shutter tapping once every few seconds. Ben looked at the second plate. After a long moment, he picked it up and returned it to the cupboard. He did not eat until after dark. The next morning he went to Samuel Kent. Samuel was shoeing a sorrel mare when Ben entered the smithy. "You look terrible," Samuel said. "Need your memory." "That bad then?" Ben ignored it. He laid Sloane's easement copy on the workbench. Samuel wiped his hands. Ben pointed to the date. "Where was my father that week?" Samuel squinted. "Why, if he signed this in Juniper Crossing, I need to know." Samuel stared at the date, then walked to the back room. He returned, carrying an old brand book tied with string. "Your father took cattle south that fall. South where?" Samuel flipped pages. "Fort Laramie." Ben leaned closer. Samuel found the entry. "James Porter. 12 remount horses, 3 wagons. Departed September 4th. Returned September 17th. The Sloane document was dated September 9th. Ben read it again. "You sure this is your writing?" Samuel snorted. "I was uglier then, but I wrote the same." Ben folded the copy. For the first time in days, something inside him moved that was not regret. By noon, he was back at North Star pulling boxes from the loft above the old office. Dust covered everything: brand books, feed receipts, canceled notes, letters from men long dead. He searched until his shoulders ached. Nothing. Meanwhile, Naomi sat at the small desk in her boarding house room, with 3 of her father's notebooks open around her. She had spent years reading his figures. She knew when he was angry by the pressure of his pencil. Knew when money was short, because he stopped using full words. Knew how he marked doubtful accounts with a short line through the corner. Near the back of an 1878 notebook, she found something she had never understood. 2 copies, North Cupboard, NS. She read it several times, NS North Star. Her pulse quickened. She closed the book and stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. Margaret looked up from the hall below. "Where are you going?" "North Star." Again. Naomi was already reaching for her coat, this time for a cupboard. She reached the ranch before sunset. Ben was coming out of the office with another box when he saw her. Neither mentioned Sunday. Naomi held up the notebook. "My father wrote this." Ben read the line. "North Cupboard." "You have one?" Ben looked toward the house, in the old office. They went in together. The cupboard stood against the north wall beneath a shelf of ledgers. Ben emptied it. Nothing. Naomi ran her hand along the back. "Too shallow." "What?" "The outside depth is greater than the inside." Ben crouched beside her. He pressed the rear panel. It did not move. Naomi found 2 old square nails set deeper than the others. "These aren't holding the back." Ben took a small pry tool from the desk. He looked at her first. Naomi nodded. The panel came loose with a dry wooden crack. Behind it lay a narrow packet wrapped in oilcloth. Neither spoke. Naomi lifted it out. Inside were 2 folded documents. The first carried her father's signature, Isaac Walker. The second carried James Porter's. They read slowly. The language was plain. Spring access shared between Walker Meadow and North Star Ranch. Wagon passage preserved for both properties. No exclusive transfer to any freight company without consent from both landholders. Naomi sat down. Ben remained standing. "So Sloane's copy was changed," she said. "Or copied from something changed." She pointed to the signatures. "These are older." Ben set Samuel's brand book entry beside the papers. "My father was at Fort Laramie when Sloane's document says he signed in town." Naomi looked up. For the first time since Walter had handed her the easement copy, she let herself breathe fully. Then someone knocked. 3 times, Ben's face hardened. He opened the door. Edgar Sloane stood on the porch. His coat was buttoned high against the cold. "Porter." Ben did not invite him in. Sloane glanced past him and saw Naomi, then the oilcloth packet on the table. His eyes rested there 1 second too long. "Found something?" Ben said nothing. Sloane smiled without warmth. "I came to save everyone trouble." Naomi stood. "What kind?" "The kind courts create." Ben stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. Sloane lowered his voice. "I'll withdraw the North Star portion of my petition." Ben watched him. "In exchange, you don't present anything claiming Walker access." Ben's face went still. Sloane continued. "Your cattle route stays untouched. Your south pasture stays clear. Your freight costs come down. And Walker Meadow?" Sloane looked toward the closed door. "Not your problem." Ben's hands remained at his sides. "Open." Sloane watched them anyway. "You built this place back from debt," Sloane said. 10 years by my count." Ben looked past him at the cattle sheds, the barn roof, the long fence line running pale in the evening. Every board had cost something. Every acre had taken work. Sloane took 1 step closer. "Keep your ranch," Ben said nothing, "and let Miss Walker make her own arrangements." The wording was careful, almost respectable. That made it worse. Ben looked toward the house. Through the window, Naomi stood beside the table where the original agreement lay open beneath the lamp. He thought of the second plate back in the cupboard. He thought of Walker Meadow without a road. He thought of everything a man could keep by saying nothing. Then he looked at Sloane. "When's the hearing?" Sloane's expression changed slightly. "Monday," Ben nodded. "Then I'll see you Monday." Sloane studied him. "You should think before then." "I will." Sloane mounted and rode away. Ben remained in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats faded. When he went back inside, Naomi had not touched the papers. She looked at him. What did he want? Ben closed the door. For once, he did not hide behind silence. He offered to leave North Star alone if I leave you out of the agreement. Naomi's face did not move. Ben looked at the papers, then at the dark window. He had spent nearly 10 years keeping North Star alive. Now the easiest way to save it was to pretend he had never found the truth. Ben did not sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table until the lamp burned low, the original agreement folded beside his hand. Naomi had gone back to Juniper Crossing before midnight, not because they had argued, because there was nothing useful left to say. She had asked only one question before leaving. Do you know what you'll do? Ben had looked at the paper. Yes. She had studied him for a long moment, as though measuring whether the answer was meant for her or for himself. Then she nodded. All right. That was all. Monday morning came hard and bright. A white frost lay over the boardwalks of Juniper Crossing. Horses blew steam at the hitching rails. Men stood outside Palmer's store with their collars turned up, pretending they had business near the county office. Everybody had heard there would be a hearing. In a town the size of Juniper Crossing, land trouble was public entertainment, until it became somebody's livelihood. Walter Pierce had moved 2 benches into the record room. Samuel Kent stood near the back wall. Margaret Lane sat beside Naomi. Edgar Sloane arrived early, carrying a leather case and wearing a dark wool coat. Ben came last. Conversation died when he stepped through the doorway. He removed his hat. The ceiling was low enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the beam. Sloane watched him cross the room. Ben did not look at him. Walter cleared his throat. We're here regarding the petition filed by Sloane Freight and Cattle concerning wagon passage through the old Granite Road corridor and associated access across Porter and Walker Holdings. He spoke slowly, carefully. This is not a criminal proceeding. We're reviewing land use records and the validity of the documents presented. Sloane opened his case. I believe my copy is clear. Walter did not answer. He looked at Ben. Mr. Porter? Ben remained standing. The room seemed smaller with him in it. For years, men had mistaken his silence for threat. That morning, there was nothing threatening in him, only decision. He reached inside his coat and took out the oilcloth packet. Sloane's jaw tightened. Ben walked to Walter's desk. He set the original agreement down. My land doesn't become safe by taking what belongs to hers. No speech followed. No accusation. Ben stepped back. Naomi looked at him. He did not look away this time. Walter unfolded the agreement. The room stayed quiet while he read. Sloane moved first. That document has no county seal. Naomi rose. It predates the surviving filing set. Sloane turned toward her. It also appeared conveniently after my petition. Naomi carried her father's notebook to the desk. So did your copy. Walter lifted a hand. One at a time, Naomi placed the notebook beside the agreement. She did not rush. This entry is in my father's hand. It refers to 2 copies kept at North Star. The notation appears between freight entries from the same season as the original agreement. She opened another book. These are his regular abbreviations. Same spacing, same shorthand, same pencil pressure. Sloane gave a short laugh. You're asking us to trust a daughter's opinion. No. Naomi looked directly at him. I'm asking Mr. Pierce to compare records. That changed the room. Walter pulled Sloane's easement copy closer. Naomi pointed to the date. September 9th. Then she opened Samuel's brand book. Samuel stepped forward. James Porter left Juniper Crossing September 4th, he said. Fort Laramie Run. 12 remount horses, 3 wagons. Came back the 17th. Sloane said, memory fails. Samuel tapped the page. That's why I wrote it down. A few men at the back shifted. Walter leaned over the documents. Naomi continued. The signature on Mr. Sloane's copy resembles James Porter's, but the body writing does not match the original agreement. Sloane's mouth hardened. Lots of men used clerks. Yes, Naomi pulled one of North Star's old freight ledgers from her case, which is why I brought these. She opened to 3 entries signed by James Porter. His P is narrow. The loop on the R never closes. Here, Walter compared them. Naomi pointed to Sloane's copy. This signature closes both. Sloane leaned forward. That's hardly proof. No, Naomi said, but the date is. She turned to another page, and this, a duplicate numbering sequence, appeared at the lower corner of Sloane's easement. Naomi had found the same number style on freight forms issued years later by Sloane's predecessor company. Walter removed his spectacles. These forms weren't in use in '78. Exactly. The room changed then, not dramatically. Nobody shouted. Nobody reached for a gun, but several faces turned toward Sloane at once. That was enough. Sloane closed his case. Even if the copy is defective, it doesn't prove Walker has commercial access. Naomi slid the original agreement toward Walter. It doesn't have to. Walter read the relevant line aloud. Shared spring and wagon passage to remain with both holdings and not be transferred exclusively without consent of both landholders. Silence. Sloane looked at Ben. Ben stood near the wall, hat in one hand. You understand what this does to North Star's claim? Sloane said. Ben nodded. It limits exclusivity. It costs you leverage, then it costs me leverage. Sloane stared at him. You'd give that away? Ben's expression barely changed. It wasn't mine alone. That was the end of it, not legally. Walter still had papers to mark and statements to copy, but everyone in the room understood. By noon, Sloane's petition had been denied pending further review. Walter opened an inquiry into the granite road fees collected from local ranches. Samuel promised to bring older livery receipts. 2 ranchers who had used Sloane Freight for years walked out talking quietly about hiring independent wagons instead. Sloane left without looking at Naomi. Ben remained until Walter finished copying the original agreement. Then he rode home. He did not ask Naomi what she planned to do. He did not ask about Cheyenne. The offer still existed. The hearing had changed the law. It had not changed her right to leave. That evening, North Star was quiet. Ben fed the horses, checked the barn latch, carried in wood. He cooked beans and warmed leftover beef. When the food was ready, he opened the cupboard. 1 plate, he set it on the table. He stood there for a moment, then closed the cupboard. The lamp burned steadily. Outside, the wind had dropped. Ben sat down. He had just reached for the spoon when he heard a horse in the yard. He froze. Not from fear, from recognition. Boot crossed the porch. The door opened. Naomi stood there with her travel bag in one hand. Ben rose. Neither spoke at first. Naomi closed the door behind her. She looked at the table, 1 plate. Her eyes moved to the cupboard. Then to Ben. He did not explain. Naomi set her bag down. She crossed the room, opened the cupboard, took out the 2nd plate. Ben watched as she placed it across from his. The sound of crockery touching wood was small. It filled the room. Naomi took off her coat. There's still time to change your mind about supper. Ben looked at the 2nd plate, then at her. I know you can leave. Naomi's hand stopped on the chair. Ben continued, I want you to stay. No demand, no bargain, no mention of what he had done that morning. Naomi looked at him for a long time. I'm not staying because you want me to. I know, I'm not staying because of the hearing. Ben nodded. I know. And I'm not staying because I owe you anything. You don't. Her shoulders lowered slightly. What I want is here too. Ben said nothing. Naomi looked toward the dark window. Walker Meadow, he waited. The horse yard, another pause. My own work, my own name on the books. Then she looked at him. And you. Ben let out a breath. It seemed to come from somewhere years deep. Naomi sat down. Ben reached for the pot and served her first. Neither mentioned Cheyenne again that night. They did not need to. Winter came early. The first real snow settled over Walker Meadow before Thanksgiving. Ben helped Naomi shore up the north wall of the old barn, but only after she showed him the plan and told him which beams she wanted saved. Samuel found her 2 used stall gates from a ranch west of town. Margaret Lane helped sew canvas covers for feed bins. Naomi kept North Star's books through winter for pay, then began taking her own accounts when wagon traffic returned in spring. By May, the sign went up. Walker Horse Yard, black letters on pine. Ben stood beside Naomi when Samuel nailed it above the gate. He said nothing. Naomi looked at him. You disapprove? Crooked. Samuel climbed down the ladder. It's straight. Ben tilted his head. Naomi laughed. The sound carried across the yard. That summer, wagon teams began stopping at Walker Meadow. Some came for water, some for fresh horses. A few ranchers hired Naomi to keep their freight accounts because word had spread that she could find $10 hiding where another man lost 50. North Star remained North Star. Walker Meadow remained Walker Meadow. Ben built a gate in the fence line between them. A wide wagon gate. Naomi stood beside him while he hung it. No merger? She asked. No. No annexation. No. You sure? Ben tested the hinge. It swings both ways. Naomi looked at him. That'll do. They married the following autumn. Small ceremony. Samuel stood with Ben. Margaret stood with Naomi. Walter signed the record. No grand promises. No crowd. Afterward, they ate at North Star with 6 people around a table that had once seemed too large for one man. Years later, Ben still came home from the north pasture by the same road. One evening, the sun dropped behind the Medicine Bow Hills in a band of red and gold. He saw smoke rising from the chimney, then lamplight in the kitchen window. For a second, memory stopped him. Another autumn. Another ride home. Another light where none was expected. He smiled. His horse carried him into the yard. Ben dismounted. He did not pause on the porch, did not reach toward the holster at his side. He opened the door. Naomi stood at the table with supper ready. Her hair carried a few silver strands now. The ledger beside her belonged to Walker Horse Yard. Ben hung his hat on the peg. Naomi looked up. You're late. Fence. Always the fence. He crossed the room. On the table sat 2 plates. Ben looked at them, then at her. The life before him was not one he had planned. That no longer seemed like a loss. He sat down. Naomi sat across from him. Outside, the wind moved over 2 properties joined by a gate neither of them had ever needed to lock. Maybe that gate said more about Ben and Naomi than any wedding vow could. He had spent years believing strength meant needing nothing from anyone. She had spent years making certain that no promise, no man, and no hardship could take away the life she had worked to build. Neither of them was wrong to be careful. Life had given them reasons for that. But somewhere between an old freight bill, a mountain road, a difficult truth, and 2 plates on a kitchen table, they learned something harder. Love did not have to mean surrender. Ben could want Naomi beside him without claiming her future. Naomi could choose Ben without giving up her land, her work, or her own name. And when the choice finally came, he protected what was right, even though silence would have protected him. She stayed only after she knew she was completely free to leave. Maybe that is why their life together lasted. Not because one rescued the other, but because each became a place where the other could stand without becoming smaller. So if you had been Naomi, with a safer road waiting in Cheyenne, would you have stayed? Tell us in the comments. And if stories about quiet courage, hard choices, and the kind of love that has to be earned mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more Western stories ahead. some tender, some mysterious, and some about people discovering that home can appear where they never thought to look.